This week's Device Talks Weekly podcast is brought to you by Device Talks Tuesday. It's back. Join us on the 19th. This is a coming Tuesday. We're going to talk about innovation in 2021. Go to devicetalks.com for more information. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome to this week's episode of the Device Talks Weekly Podcast. This is episode 41. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to talk a lot about digital surgery this week. We're opening up our opening keynote with Mark Toland. Mark is the new CEO of Medical Micro Instruments, aka MMI. He has most recently been the CEO of Corindus, which he's helped sell to Siemens. He's also a partner at BioStar Capital. Mark and I talked a bit about opportunities for new robotic surgery tools. MMI is very cool. It's got a very neat microsurgery platform, and we'll understand how that will help MMI compete in the future and when it plans to come to the U.S. Our closing keynote conversation includes Scott Huennekens. Scott, of course, is well known in Medtech. He's the former CEO of Verb Surgical, the effort between Google and J&J to build a digital surgery platform. We also spoke in that same conversation with Kal Patel. He is the CEO of BrightInsight. Previously had been with Doctors on Demand and Amgen, helping the pharmaceutical company formulate its digital strategy. Scott, Kal, and I talked a bit about the state of digital surgery, where it is and where it's going. They definitely brought different perspectives to the talk, and I know you'll enjoy that conversation. Before we get into those two big talks, we're going to have our opening conversation with my podcast partner, Chris Newmarker, the executive editor of Life Sciences at Mass Device.
Good to be here, Tom.
Great to have you back. I know it's been a busy virtual week. We've had virtual JP Morgan. We've had virtual, that was last week. No, this is this week. Yeah.
This week. Time flies by.
That's right.
Time flies by when you got a lot of virtual conferences to attend.
This is January still, right? We're still in January?
Yes, it is still January.
Okay,
there is still snow falling outside of my house and outside Minneapolis. So,
that is unfortunate. So to all of our Minneapolis, Minnesota folks, I am dreadfully sorry. We have miserable weather here in Boston, but there's no snow. But we have...
Hey, my kids are happy. More sledding. Break the sleds out.
That's right. And they're small kids, so you can just put them on a very tiny hill in the backyard, and they're happy for hours.
Front lawn. I just tell them, we just got to look both ways, down the street, and then, hey, you kids just head right down that front lawn.
But
all good.
We, in addition to these virtual conferences, and we're going to hear from Danielle Kirsh, who is on the scene at CES in virtual Vegas. Yeah. We'll hear a little bit of a report of what was going on there. But we've had other news from some of our MedTech leaders. So, Chris, let's get right into the Newmarker's Newsmakers. And we're going to start off with three biggies this week. What is number 3 on the Newmarker's Newsmakers list?
Number 3 on the list actually came out of, this virtual CES event. They had a top Abbott executive on a panel who was, talking, kind of about how, Abbott kind of responded to the coronavirus pandemic last year. And, one of the interesting things was they, by their telling, it sounds like they were tracking this virus in China at the end of 2019 and into early 2020. So they're kind of, early in on, trying to figure out what to do about it. And, it seems to have paid off for Abbott too, because, their Binax Now tests, which are like these fast antigen tests that are on a card. I mean, they kind of resemble pregnancy tests. They've kind of become ubiquitous, when it comes to testing for COVID. So, just kind of an interesting thing, about hey, it kind of seems like it kind of helps to really pay attention to things and see what's coming. I know 3M too kind of said that they were kind of getting early indications that this pandemic was going to be a big a problem too, so that helped them ramp up N95 mass production, though.
That would be an interesting feature, actually, to talk to the various companies about what sort of war room monitoring setups they have and how they're tracking this pandemic. And I hope never, but future pandemics.
Here's the hope that this really is a once in 100-year pandemic, man.
Cross that off the bucket list? Yes. Yeah, for sure. But as you mentioned, Danielle was, quote, unquote, at CES. And I had an opportunity to speak with her a bit. Obviously, telehealth was a big theme there as well. So let's hear from Danielle Kirsh. She's the senior editor at Mass Device. Danielle, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You were able to virtually, of course, attend CES 2021, which has become increasingly a kind of a medical device healthcare conference. And always interesting to see what kind of gadgets and tech is coming out of that. What were you able to, what did you take away? What's new and exciting we're going to be talking about for the next 12 months in Medtech?
Obviously, it felt like COVID was kind of at the center of a lot of innovation that was happening. There was a lot of talk about digital health. And I know they recently came out and said digital health was probably the biggest thing that they were doing at CES this year. And one of the things that I saw was Omron's VitalSight remote heart monitor was something that could monitor blood pressure from the home and like automatically send that data through a hub to your doctor, who can personalize your blood pressure thresholds and improve engagement with physicians, because there were a lot more heart attack deaths during COVID because people were less likely to go to the hospital. It's because of COVID.
Do you know how they were engaging with the patient? How are they measuring it? You're actually sticking your arm in a thing that inflates, or did they have some other kind of cool interface?
It looks like it's like a device that just attaches to your body. I guess it coincides with their Omron, their heart rate sensor that they had on their watch. That was a big thing for them last year. So.
And you had done a feature for Mass Device, or was it MDO? Sort of MDO, Medical Design Outsourcing. You were looking at the medical technologies you need to know about from CES. And one of them that looked particularly cool to me was the telemedicine one that you were able really to, it seemed as if you were able to transmit your vitals via your cell phone. Was that talked about at all?
Not so much in a panel, but they did have a booth. And I know that one is, once again, it's on the telehealth track, and it uses artificial intelligence and video-based monitoring to measure vital signs like heart rate, oxygen saturation, respiration rate, just using your smartphone camera. And it works with anyone over the age of 18 of any gender, and they said any skin color as well. So
that's outstanding. That's going to be interesting to watch. All right. Well, cool stuff. Thanks for keeping us abreast. Now that you've gone to CES virtually, you're gonna push to go next year when it's hopefully back in Vegas.
We were hoping I could go this year in person, but this will do. Maybe it'll give me some leeway up top.
Yeah, good warm up. Yeah, a little leverage when you're negotiating the travel budget next year.
Yeah.
All right, Danielle, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, and we're back. Chris, will you get Danielle Kirsh a travel budget so she can actually go to Vegas next year for CES? Can you do anything about that?
Hey, I don't know. I think Danielle, that might be in your future. So we'll
start lobbying. Well, let's give it a few more months, but certainly need to get back to some in-person meetings.
Yeah, like Danielle, what do you think of blackjack? That's a question. Yeah,
it's my game, man. Now it's time for my conversation with Mark Toland, the CEO of MMI. Once again, Mark had been the CEO of Corindus, so he knows robotics. Corindus was really focused on telesurgery. MMI has a much different approach to robotic surgery. Let's listen. Well, Mark Toland, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's great to catch up with you. We spoke with Doug Teeney earlier this year, got the update on Corindus. You've left Corindus at the time. I think you were had just left or were leaving, and wanted to follow up with you and see where you landed. You've got an interesting story. At the time, though, I seem to remember you were going to go the VC route. Did that just not take, or did this opportunity come to you after that? How did you end up at Medical Micro Instruments?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom. So what we experienced at Corindus was a really fun, exciting, and pioneering journey. And, I think that, now Siemens has a hold of it. They'll continue to execute on our mission and vision of bringing vascular robotics across the world and really solving some pretty significant issues with access to care. One of the things that was nice about Corindus after I left Boston Scientific was you jumped into a smaller company and you were really able to make some things happen that larger companies have a difficult time moving as quickly as these small companies. So I really enjoyed that. That was one of the requirements of me looking for the next thing is how can you really impact something quickly, and also how can you put yourself in a position where you're impacting where healthcare is going versus where it's been. And so the VC space I'm still involved in. I'm a partner with BioStar Capital.
Okay.
And quite honestly, it affords me the opportunity to, I will say, purview all of the early stage work that's going on out there in devices from an capital infusion standpoint, as well as a potential operational standpoint and oversight. So it's been a really great experience to be part of BioStar, and one that will continue. So, that still sits in existence, but, I still needed to, put my teeth into a really big operational job. As a result, I jumped into a microsurgical robotics company called MMI, based out of Italy. I am the CEO there, and will be trying to bring the field of microsurgical robotic to fruition. It's similar to Corindus. Interventional robotics was still in its infancy. Microsurgery robotics is still in its infancy, and that's just a fun experience to go through.
That's great. No, that's a great lead in for my question, because when I did hear that you would join a startup in surgical robotics, I thought to myself, well, every big company has its program. We've seen so much development in this just over the last 5 years or so. What could be left? Like, are we at a point where there's some Me Tooism going on in regard to follow-up technologies? I'm curious from your perspective. I want to get into MMI in a moment, but you were at Boston Sci, you were at Corindus, you were in the VC world, which allowed you to survey the landscape. What is the state of surgical robotics? Are we moving to a point where specialty robotics companies like MMI are sort of going to be the next generation, the next wave?
Well, I think there's two waves. One wave we're already seeing is that a lot of the robotic companies in the surgical space, pick Intuitive or Medtronic or J&J, they've spent a lot of time thinking about how to build the hands for, I'll call it general surgery, and that's the robot itself. Now they're thinking about data integration work. They're thinking about how that translates into artificial intelligence over time. So the big broader eyes, brain and the hands merged together is one trend that I think all the big robotic companies are trying to think about how they differentiate their platform and their portfolio that goes beyond just the robot. That's one. Number two is I do think that there's spaces in robotics that are completely untouched. And a great example of that is when Auris launched the platform around bronchial oncology work. There's only one company building a technology behind that was Intuitive at the time, but they were able to generate a significant valuation for their company of over $3 billion by jumping into a field of robotics that nobody had really spent a lot of time in. So I do think there's some periphery areas of robotics that makes a lot of sense. When you take that concept and then you say, okay, well, what is MMI doing? It actually probably makes even more sense on the robotic side, because you're in a micro area of work where precision, reduced tremor, and everything associated with the robot being just better than a human seems to really make a lot of sense. The challenge that we've had in the robotic space is nobody really spent a lot of time to go develop that technology, because general surgery was taking off in such a big forum. And obviously, Intuitive, well over 60, 70, 80 billion dollars, everybody was chasing, how can I go compete against them? And I think some of these other companies have carved out a little bit of a niche in their applications which have significant patient outcome benefits. So I think there's a two-prong approach. You've got complete system, and then you've got how do you go find the niches that are untouched.
That's a great point. No, you're right. The bigger companies, the robotic systems are almost like the anchor stores that are kind of the base of the business, and now they're building the digital surgery infrastructure around it.
Correct.
And MMI, the weakness of a podcast is not being able to see your hand, which is just remarkably small. And we'll put some links to images on it so people can track it. I know you're new to the company. I did catch a really cool, nicely done video by CNBC on the company that gave a backstory of the two co-founders, allowed them to tell the story. But why don't you bring our listeners up to date to Salemi and how it was developed and what it's able to do? Well,
the team is about 50 people in Pisa, Italy, and the three co-founders really, built it from the distal tip backwards. So they thought about how do we think about, being able to manipulate a robotic platform from the distal gripper all the way back. And if you take a look at the work that Giuseppe Prisco did at Intuitive, he had 12 years of experience with Intuitive, all on the R&D side. He was a lead engineer in the current platform, the XI, and his ability to put together a team of people to do the tech dev was really foundational and fundamental to where MMI is today. They were able to build a robot and get it approved for microsurgery in Europe. Really in a record amount of time, 5 to 6 years. So where it is today is pretty interesting because the robot is ready to go. What's different about it compared to how people think about surgical robotics is you could go through a laundry list of characteristics, but the two most important things are what I call size, and then I'll call it size and scale. And then your ability to replicate human movements. And so why is that important, right? So if you take a look at Intuitive in general surgery, they're really replicating about 3 to 5x of what a human can do in terms of their scalability. So 3 to 5x. So if you move something, it's going to translate to 5 times better movement by the robot. So a microsurgery robot like MMI is 20 times. So that means you can get a microscope on and you can scale your hand movement down 20 times more precise than your hands would do today. So it's got 4 times the capabilities of precision than a Intuitive robot would do. And then number 2 is you've got what's called degrees of freedom. Mm-hmm. And when you're operating in small places, you need to be able to have the robot act like your wrists and your elbows. So if you're going to have true degrees of freedom, your wrists have 7 degrees of freedom. The current robots on the market today have between 3 to 5 degrees of freedom. So you have to take that in and replicate that into the robot so that you can move those tiny instruments similar to how you would move your hand. So it goes beyond what we would call increased precision and reduced tremor. It actually goes into a state where how can we start to think about doing things we've never been able to do in healthcare before? So can you take microsurgery and move it to super microsurgery? Can you take it to nano microsurgery? And that's how we're now working with, instead of us carrying around our big laptops all the time, we're carrying around our phones. Mm-hmm. And, if you think about taking the work that's been done in the super micro and the nanotechnology field of electronics and apply it to healthcare, you've got neurosurgeons who look at reducing the incision in the brain and how much brain they have to take out. You've got plastic surgeons being able to reconstruct things that they've never been able to reconstruct before. You can sew back on digits of your hands or your toes in trauma. You can do different pediatric applications that you've never been able to do before. And we really haven't even tested how far you could take the technology with applications that go into the super micro and or nano field.
So it sounds as if you're talking not only about hopefully, or actually your studies show that you are improving the performance of some of these procedures. I think it was the preclinical data showed that you reduced, or Salemi reduced thrombosis, or the formation of blood clots by half, which is remarkable. So you're not only doing things that are currently done better, but you see an opportunity to do things that currently can't be done.
Well, I do. So going back to the do things that you want to do better. Imagine that you can reduce. So the blood clots are one element, but really, essentially, what that means is you've got a failure of the vessel. So you have no blood flow in whatever you just created, which is essential to the recovery of that patient. The patient gets closed after surgery. So to go and redo that, because the blood isn't flowing in the artery or the vein, or even you can apply it to nerves, then you've got a significant patient outcome problem on your hands. So we saw that in the preclinical data that could have a dramatic impact on patient redos and the ability for a patient to recover faster and not have as many issues associated with closures of vessels. So that's one part of it. But then there's a second part of it is, super microsurgery is down to 0.3 millimeters of an artery.
Wow.
So what does that mean? That means that you can start to do things that you never even thought capable with your human hands. That means that a physician who was thinking about starting up or building a lymphatic surgery program could now actually probably do that because they have the capabilities to do it. Those are some of the smallest arteries in the body. And the reason we don't do it today is because human hands can't do it. So I do think that it has applications that go very broad that we haven't even truly explored or understood yet, which is part of the exciting journey of this company. When you're talking about, robotic companies that are just going after, hey, I want to compete against Intuitive and I want to go after the laparoscopic surgery, robotic play. This company I want to go create a field that doesn't even exist today.
That's exciting. So, and given your background with Corindus, where you were working with 5G, you were working with telesurgery, do you see that opportunity here? Because if you have these robots everywhere and a single specialist, not nearby, but near enough to be able to do, you could help a lot of people in a lot of remote places.
I do. I really do, particularly for the emergent cases like trauma. If you got, the first couple of cases we did were motorcycle accidents, and we had to work on feet, and we were, replacing the toes of the foot, and as you're tying back the arteries and the nerves. Imagine you don't have a microsurgeon trauma physician available. You could essentially bring the Salemi in right over top of the general surgeon, and you could have the microsurgeon operating from wherever in the world for just that particular application, sewing a 0.5 millimeter artery together in a vascular anastomosis that's going to regenerate the blood flow of the tissue that was dislodged from the patient.
So you're in no way competing with any of the other surgery systems you mentioned before. You're going to have a Mako and one of these. You're going to have one of the other systems and this. Talk to me about, I'm not an engineer, but I'm just fascinated by the idea of translating the force of a surgeon, the gestures, the moves of a surgeon, and narrowing them into this teeny tiny force where you're moving your hand by an inch, but you're actually moving the surgical piece by a fraction of that. What are the challenges of doing that? That sounds difficult, obviously.
Well, I'm not an engineer either, Tom. So I got to say that, my level of knowledge of taking this down to a granular level like my VP of R&D or Giuseppe could do is lesser than that. But, let me give you a visual of this. So, imagine you're the operator and you've got these two tweezers in both hands. And you're essentially using these tweezers in a field of air. And within this field of air, you're able to sew like you normally would sew as a physician, assuming you were in the body. And then this is translating in 20x times your movements from behind you and over your shoulders of exactly the hand movements that you're moving. So what it allows you to do, it allows you to program it so you could go all the way down to 10x, 15x, 12x, or 20x, depending upon how small of space you were able to accomplish or you wanted to try to accomplish in, which allows you optionality. So if you want to make more macro movements and you don't need the same precision, you can start to do this with Salemi. But if you want super fine micro movements with super fine detail associated with an area that you're trying to sew, super small arteries like 0.3 to 0.5, you're essentially doing this in the air, and it's just it's recognizing your hand movements at the same time that you're making the movements, and it's doing it in a way we call nano wrist technology. So if your wrist is moving 1 degree of freedom, or if your other wrist is moving 3 or 4 degrees of freedom, it will replicate your wrist movements the same way that you currently do as a human. And quite honestly, that's been one of the biggest gating factors of microsurgical robotics. Is no company has ever been able to come up with 7 degrees of freedom of movement in the robot compared to others that are closer to 3 to 5 degrees of movement. So, think of them moving up and down and side to side, maybe a couple angles. But if you're really in a super small space, you've got to be able to go every single angle in every single direction. And that's what we've got here.
Excellent. 3 more questions. Small question. Are you going to be developing your own instruments? Do you develop your own instruments that are used with the robot, or do you use standard tools that would be used in these procedures? We do.
Imagine our robot has disposable instruments that they lock into the robot. And, they're essentially the grippers and the scissors and, all components to you being able to grab a super small suture and then be able to take that suture and sew. So that's essentially what the company has today. In terms of instrumentation of how to do this type of procedure, you wouldn't need more than that. So you would essentially use our instruments to get into the area you want to operate. And then once you were in there, you would start to use the suture from any manufacturer out there.
Bigger question for the company. You have CE mark. What is your status commercially in Europe, and what are your plans in the US with the FDA?
Great question. So we plan to commercialize selectively in Europe. I think one of the most important things that a robotic company can do right now is create value for the product. And so what does that mean is we've got to go build a sound base of clinical evidence to support our applications before you can just go out and start to, sell robots. I think we can do that in a thoughtful way with strategic accounts in Europe that allow us to really put ourselves in a position where we learn a lot. We gather the right amount of evidence to support our value proposition. And simultaneously to that, we'll use that data to submit into the FDA our approach with them on how we might get that approved. So if we work those two in parallel, we get FDA approval at the same time that we've got a number of publications and clinical evidence supporting what we're saying, so that when we really want to commercialize in a really large way across the world, starting with the US and also in Europe, and then potentially even going to Japan, South Korea, and other places, you've got that value proposition created other than just what we've currently talked about today. And that's our goal in the short term, is to gather clinical evidence, start up in selective sites in Europe that really want to explore the technology and the applications of it. And simultaneously, we'll be launching or gathering the right amount of evidence to support our application in the FDA for approval. Timeline-wise, this year is about gathering the evidence, and next year is about the FDA approval.
Okay. And final question about you. You said you're still with BioStar. Are you looking for what kind of deals are you looking for? Are you looking for more robotic deals? Are you looking to do, is this your only robotic deal? You don't want to do any more? Someone who wants to pitch you an idea, what kind of stuff are you looking for at BioStar?
Yeah, so few answers to that. So number one is I joined a board of an AI company. It's a cardiology AI company called Cardiologs. I've also joined the board of an early stage startup in the early med device space for IVL therapy. IVL is essentially shockwave. That company's done extremely well. They've got a $4 billion market cap, and so we've funded that company and started to expand in the development of that. It's early stage, but that's been an interesting journey. The AI piece is commercially available. Think of it as the intel inside of all the diagnostic ECG work that's going on out there. It's really kind of an exciting time to think about how we monetize AI, because nobody's really done it yet. That's an area that still is in discovery mode. And so I have a keen interest in that. And BioStar is looking broad and wide. So they've historically been cardiovascular and orthopedic focused, but they're expanding to all healthcare now, including healthcare IT, including areas in the diabetes space. And that's been fun to be able to see things beyond what my previous experience has been. But I think one of the things that's really exciting, it particularly, I'll call it the silver lining of COVID-19, is that the interest level in new technology in healthcare has never been higher. So there's a lot of activity going on.
Absolutely. No, we're seeing a lot of fundraising dollars going to it as well. So I know I said 3 questions. I'm going to ask the 4th. What does the field or the crop of new robotics companies look like? Are you seeing / hearing / aware of a lot of startups out there that are trying to really disrupt many, many things? Is it a kind of a slow percolation? What does that field look like right now?
Well, the surgical robotic space is never really been hotter. I mean, if you think about the number of companies investing in robotics R&D, it's I know of 50 plus companies out there, and you've got the big strategics that are leading a significant investment charge. You've got the medium-sized companies that are just trying to make it, like Transenterix and Titan Medical and some of these others. And then you've got the smaller startups that you and I don't even really know about. We just hear concept only right now. So I think you've got 3 different types of robotic plays, which is really interesting for the time of robotics, because I don't know if we know what the next 5 years is going to present to us, because there's a lot of great ideas that are happening behind the scenes that we may not even see in terms of prototype mode. The one thing I will tell you, though, is every single robotic company, going back to our first part of the conversation, is thinking about how they make their system a platform, not just a robot. And that's probably one of the most important key ingredients of the equation. But I do think you'll see competitors out there to Corindus. I've heard of 3 or 4 companies that are early stage mode of prototype build, particularly as they think about a neurovascular robotic platform. I think you'll continue to see advancements in the general surgery robotic space. And then you've got the niches out there that will continue to attract interest, particularly if there's an unmet need that the robot is meeting.
Competitors to Corindus or to MMI?
All the above. I think
Okay.
I just don't think any space right now. That's why I put so much an emphasis on IP in robotics. I don't think any space in robotics is not going to have competition. I think there's going to be plenty of, I'll call it copycats out there, but also, the valuation of these companies is super high. And, they're going to continue to grow because there's such a long growth runway. If you look at the 20-year trajectory of where robotics is going to go, the long growth runway just adds up so significantly from a valuation standpoint. It makes a tremendous amount of sense financially. But then as you find the right application to meet an unmet need, it's a double whammy in terms of a home run.
Well, this is a really fun conversation. Can't wait to see what MMI can be, and look forward to following the story. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks, Tom.
All right, so Mark Toland is going to be leading the way at MMI. It was interesting, Chris. I didn't realize until I read the press release that Andrew Cleland, the former CEO of Ardian and of 12, and has been with the Fogarty Institute, is the chairman of that group. So I think that's I think that's a pretty
that's some pretty prestigious leadership there. So yeah.
Next up on our Newmarker's Newsmakers, number 2. is?
Well, Steris is going to acquire Cantel Medical for $4.6 billion. So this is another, I mean, we're only a few weeks into the year. We're already having more major, mergers in the medical device space. And this, this is a big deal because, I mean, these are both companies that are, are doing a lot of things in the infection prevention space, and now they're coming together. So, I mean, it's really kind of creating an infection prevention giant. So really interesting to see where that's going. And they're kind of saying, one of the big things for Steris is that this would add a full suite of high-level disinfection disposables, capital equipment services, to Steris's endoscopy offerings. So yeah, very interesting. And Steris gets to branch into the dental business a bit, through the acquisition. So just, we'll see how this goes.
Well, I remember one expert in our last podcast of 2020 suggesting that M&A would be a huge trend in 2021.
Here we go.
Expert was Chris Newmarker. So Zoom high five, Chris.
Wow.
Boom.
I am get a virtual high five.
You know what you are talking about. All right. Now let's hear the number one Newmarker's newsmakers of this week.
Well, number one is Elizabeth Holmes' case, Theranos. Here we go. There's been a slew of motions in recent days. They're really trying to hammer out what kind of evidence is going to be allowed in the case, which is, scheduled to start in July in San Jose. But one of the really interesting things is that the prosecutors would very much like to talk about her lifestyle when she was running the company. Private jets, luxury hotel trips.
And much, much more.
And much, much more, hobnobbing with the world's elite. So, her lawyers are, saying that this would, amount to like an improper emotional appeals with the jury in the case. We'll see what the judge allows. But this seems to be one strategy that the prosecutors, seem to be considering is to kind of like lay some of that stuff. Hopefully for them, like lay out some of that stuff to suggest her motivation for why the company allegedly committed this massive fraud.
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think anybody who would pursue something like this would be after the riches that go with it. So I don't know if it's peculiar to this case, but I guess they have to chase that down. So all right, well, excellent Newmarker's newsmakers. Now let us get into our closing keynote conversation, the big one. And now it's time for our closing keynote conversation. It's a three-person conversation with Scott Huennekens, the former CEO of Verb Surgical, as I mentioned. He also previously had been CEO of Volcano Corp. Scott's really led the way in digital medtech, and we talked a bit about whether that term is a little redundant or what it means exactly. So also happy to be joined by Kal Patel. Kal is the CEO of BrightInsight. He previously had worked at Amgen, helping that company with its digital strategy, and Doctors on Demand, which is a telehealth company. So Kal was coming to this conversation with a stronger pharma services background. Scott, of course, comes with a deep medtech background. It was a great and interesting conversation to understand where we are with digital medtech. Let's listen. Well, Scott Huennekens and Kal Patel, welcome to the podcast.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Well, great. Well, it's Friday afternoon, Friday before the virtual JP Morgan conference, which I'm not sure how exactly that's going to happen. It's going to be strange not having that gathering this year. But I know you both are a part of a conversation that'll take place next week, talking about sort of the state of digital connectivity. Actually, I think Mick Farrell will be on there as well. We've had him on a few Device Talks projects before, so he's another great panelist. But by the time people hear this, that will be long and done. So I don't want to talk about that specifically, but I want to tackle the issue of digital technology in medtech. This is a term, as far as I know, Scott. You and I talked a few years ago when you were post-Verb, but you were sort of the first one in my mind anyway to sort of talk about digital surgery and bringing the term digital into medtech. Now, after 2020, where we've all had to talk virtually and distantly and however you want to say it, the term digital has sort of taken over, and it means a lot of different things. So I want to use this conversation to ask you where we're at and sort of where we're going. You come at this question with very unique backgrounds, distinct backgrounds. Scott, you're coming from Medtech, where you've really incorporated digital into a lot what you're doing. Cal, you're coming into this from telemedicine and now you're working with pharma. You've worked with pharma and Medtech. So I really am excited about this talk. So let's just sort of talk a bit about your backgrounds first, just so people know where you're coming from. Scott, what are you currently doing? And sort of how have you gotten to this point? And maybe in your answer, you can just quickly run us through what you were doing at Verb and the outcome there and what that's meant to you.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, I was the employee number one at Verb Surgical, which was the joint venture between Google and J&J to build a next generation OR, which we call digital surgery. So it wasn't just a robot, but it was a robot, visualization and navigation instruments, every OR being connected, and then having a platform where all of that information could be aggregated to improve surgery, democratize surgery, share that information, outside with clinicians on a platform, et cetera. And that kind of came out of my experience at Volcano, where we built a market-leading position with a platform in cath labs and grew to 8,000 installed systems with apps. And those terms were new to Medtech, and that is open platform. A platform where you would have apps and you would have different companies integrate onto a platform to create benefits for the clinician as well as the patient. And so my background has come up through these integrated system platform plays, and we're doing the same thing now at Acutus, where I'm the executive chairman in the EP space. We're doing it at NuVasive, where I'm on the board with robotics, visualization, navigation, and implants in minimally invasive spine. And I can give you multiple examples where, Mick Farrell and what they're doing at ResMed, or what's being done by Dexcom and continuous glucose monitoring. So for me, we've moved from Medtech 1.0, which was make this device, into Medtech 2.0, which were smarter devices that had capability, to now Medtech 3.0, where the device is connected. We can aggregate data to make the devices smarter, interplay with the clinician, interplay with the patient as well, both on a vertical basis at the episode of care, or horizontally over the continuum of care. So that ties into what I'm doing now, both on public boards and then, investing and on a number of private boards, where I see the opportunity to completely disrupt markets where people are stuck in the 2.0 world. There's an opportunity to move to the 3.0 world, where there's a digital transformation that makes the product, and the product is a broader solution. It's often a platform, and it's not just you can be connected and be enabled by things like what Cal and BrightInsight are doing, or what Proximine, Care Syntax, and the likes of Avail are doing in the OR as examples. So it's a fascinating time. And when you look at a digital playbook, it's like there's 500 digital health companies, and you see these 8 different markets that are going to be disrupted. You look at what Teladoc and Livongo are doing, et cetera. So it's an exciting time, and that's what I'm focused on participating in, because of the benefits that happen for cost, quality, and outcomes. I think this is just such an exciting time. Never been a better time to be in Medtech.
Yeah, it really is exciting. And Cal, I want to get into BrightInsight in a second, but Scott, are we, the term digital medtech, I mean, are we at a point where it's almost redundant, where everything in medtech needs to have some digital component, or is it still new enough that it's a category unto itself?
No, I think you're absolutely right. It has to be digital medtech. If you're making a device, you have to understand and build into how it's going to be connected for that episode of care, as well as how it fits into the continuum of care. It just has to be part of the way you're thinking, whether that's, hey, I want to have a closed platform and have a complete solution, which I think is the wrong strategy. I'm a huge proponent of open. There's no way we would have all the capability on that iPhone that we have, that was introduced in 2007 today with Airbnb and Uber and everything else, if it would have been a closed platform where Apple had to develop every app. So I think ORs, EP labs, you name the episode of care, having it open, having it connected. Now what you see with, whether it's, all these online physician visits to overweening, derm abrasion, things like what Derm Tech is doing. I mean, there's just so many cool applications for digitization of workflows, products, and they all have to fit together, which requires digitization.
Well, Kal, that must be music to your ears at BrightInsight, because that's where you come into play. Let's talk a little bit about BrightInsight, in that it's spun out of a company called Flex. Maybe you can give a little bit out of its history and a little bit of your history as well, so listeners know exactly where you're coming from. I did give your bio up top, but it'd be good to hear directly from the source.
Yeah, happy to do that. And thanks for having me, Tom, and good to see you as always, Scott. My quick journey. I'm a physician by education, but have been on the business side of medicine, as I like to say, my whole career. And when I was at Amgen, that's when I really got deep into the technology side of things, right? How do we leverage technology to improve the real world performance of our drugs? And so we started thinking about things like connectivity, things like algorithms, et cetera. All as Scott said, for the benefit of improving clinical outcomes and the patient experience, the provider experience. And then, I was in telemedicine, we've been talking about such a hot category. And, in the early days of telemedicine, what was really interesting to me is the adoption curve, right? Where we had this amazing technology that people reviewed at the same level of, net promoter score as the iPhone or Amazon, right? People just loved the service. But at that time, folks really used it for a specific use case. They had a flu or they had, a pink eye, but that same, person wouldn't think of it for other use cases, right? So even several years ago, I think we were early on that telemedicine journey. And, one of the, small silver linings of COVID has been that rapid acceleration of people really thinking a lot more broadly and embracing these types of, digital revolutions at the level of the end user. So I think that's what we're seeing in the telemedicine space. And I think that's relevant when we think about medtech and digital, because the expectation is changing now, right? I think a couple of years ago, there was still a notion of, hey, what's the best widget? Now, the expectation of all of us as consumers, consumers first, patient second, right, is, hey, why is this not digitized? Why are these other solutions in my life that, whatever it is, the simple things in my life are all digitized, but the important things, like my medical care is not digitized, right? And so I think we do need to get to a point where you're not using the word digital to describe basically any aspect of healthcare. And certainly that goes for medtech, medical devices. At Flex and at BrightInsight, really the story there is, Flex is one of the largest third-party manufacturer of regulated medical devices in the world, and working with many of the leading medtech companies. And so as they were seeing a digital transformation happening in Flex's other industry areas, they saw that coming to pharma and medtech and recruited me to help figure out, what is really the opportunity from a digital perspective. And so we saw, what we saw was what Scott alluded to, right, which is folks beginning to recognize that, hey, digital and connectivity is not optional. We need to start thinking about that as an intrinsic part of our offerings. But companies really struggle to go from what I would say sort of POC to really thinking broad scale and ecosystems. And that's where there was really an opportunity for Flex to help, right? So in addition to just making the devices, is how do we help you think about how do you unlock the data from a digitally enabled device and manage the data end to end from a privacy, security, regulatory, and quality perspective? And that's what the BrightInsight platform does. We've since spun out of Flex. We're our own independent, venture, now growth equity-backed company. And, we work exclusively with pharma and medtech. And we integrate into the source of the data, whether that data is an app, an algorithm, a device, a wearable, implantable, hospital device. We're really agnostic to the source of the data, but we get it off the device and into the cloud, again, in a fully compliant manner, because, we're built under a quality management system that governs all the way up to class 3 and combination product intended use. But, for your medtech audience, class 3 intended use.
Are you selling a product or service? Are you selling a digital widget, for lack of a better word, that you put on a device and it collects the data, or are you collecting the data, managing the data for your clients?
Yeah, much more around the second. So we're all software, right? So we're a platform. So the way to think about, give you a quick analogy, right? So most people today are familiar with AWS, Amazon Web Services, or Microsoft Azure, or Google Cloud, right? Every basically digital product you use is actually built on top of one of those infrastructures, right? Doctor on Demand was built on top of AWS. Netflix is built on top of AWS. Amazon, the company we all know, and is built on top of AWS, and video games and everything else, right? It's the same underlying infrastructure that gets used for all these different use cases. Think of us as that type of infrastructure, but purpose built for pharma and medtech, for high risk medical intended use cases. So our infrastructure, just like that, is it's all not to throw out too much jargon, but modern software, microservices, container based, API driven. So our APIs are integrating into the source of the data. So imagine for example, a Bluetooth connected pen. That Bluetooth pen. We could integrate directly into that pen and take the data and responsibly for it. Or if the pen's talking to an app, we can integrate to the app on the phone, right? And again, it doesn't matter if you're talking about implantable hospital equipment, et cetera, but we're taking over that data so our customers don't have to worry about the privacy, security, regulatory, and quality requirements of getting that data to the cloud and then having regulated intended use applications of that data.
So Amazon is certainly operating in this space. Others, I'm sure, are as well. Is there something different about MedTech that requires a specific vendor like BrightInsight?
Yeah, it's all about the fact that we're enabling regulated intended uses. So think of it this way. Let me describe this, which is, before we did anything, we put in place a quality management system, right, that governs all the way up to class 3 intended use applications of your data. So every single piece of code we write is under that quality management system. And all of the underlying vendors that we use, right, technology tools and services you use. So for example, we're built on top of Google Cloud, but we work closely with those companies. We validate all of their functionalities that we use within our regulated environment. So we basically have built a stack on top of a public cloud that's purpose built for these high risk use cases. So if you didn't use us, then a company has to do all that work themselves. And frankly, that's what a lot of legacy solutions do today. They and again, the analogy may be, do you run your own servers, right? Do you have a server plant that runs your own servers, or do you migrate to the cloud and build your offerings in the cloud? Today, it's almost a laughable issue, right? No one's going to put in their own servers. They're going to go build on top of a public cloud. Think of it as kind of the next layer of that. Why would you do all this work over and over and over when we are focused 100% on ensuring the compliance of that data and taking that availability global, right? So we have our master file with the FDA in the US. We're available in the European Union. We just went through our MDSAP audits to be available in countries like Japan, Australia, Canada, et cetera. We're working on China. So we're this layer of infrastructure, right? Technology infrastructure and so then our customers can really focus on their actual device and what's the sensor or what's the the data, and then using that and turning it into insight without getting all mucked up by what are the privacy laws in France versus in the UK versus in Japan, because we're taking care of all of those requirements from a data management perspective, right? Or what's my intended use? Gosh, I was, only displaying the data and I wasn't regulated, but now all of a sudden I now want to use the same data feed and make a suggestion to the patient, right? So you can literally take the same physical solution and go from being unregulated with that data to being regulated. With our infrastructure, you can make that cross over to that without having to restart. And maybe I'll just say one thing that, analogy I use a lot. Again, a little bit laughable for all of us in the medtech space, but it applies. Is when you're talking about software, you think about a hammer, right? If you built your hammer and you're selling it at Home Depot, right? And then one day you're like, this is a beautiful hammer, I should sell it to orthopedic surgeons. We can't do that. You got to start over, right? Because you never had your human factors in place, and your device controls in place. You don't know where you're sourcing half your materials from. You don't have any of that, right? So you can't just make that leap. You got to have known from day one that, hey, this is probably a hammer I intend to sell into the operating room. What's similar on the software side? We run into companies all the time that are sort of operating in the non-regulated space and either don't realize they're actually regulated, or that they want to cross over to that regulated space. And then they're stuck, right? Or they do go into that regulated space, but they're bringing, frankly, really legacy software infrastructure capabilities, right? So they're doing waterfall, not agile. They're solving for one specific use case, not thinking at the level of multiple products, ecosystems, global deployment. They're not thinking about, gosh, the operating system on my patient's phone is changing all the time, right? How do I make sure my app or my solution or my connected whatever stays, compliant and usable as the iOS 14 comes out and the Android whatever comes out, right? So that's the part sort of that when I think about Medtech through 3.0 that folks like Scott are thinking about, but a lot of companies and a lot of people still haven't gotten there. They're still thinking bespoke, right? They're still thinking, I'm going to put connectivity into this device, and aren't really taking a step back and saying, well, am I doing this in a ecosystem oriented way? And am I focusing on what my company's competitive advantage is? Or am I creating a solution that's going to have siloed data and, not really be able to sort of scale and integrate into the lives of patients and providers?
So Tom, your non-digital native medical device person just listened to Kal there, and they start to glaze over, and they're just like, oh my God, this is just too much, and I'm going to put digitization out there a year or two. But thank goodness we have, again, people like him that are developing these solutions that you can integrate and be part of what you're doing to have and deliver that Medtech 3.0 vision, because you don't need to own it. You can partner with people like them or in other areas in order to create your, in our case at Verb Digital Surgery, or your digital surgery at NuVasive, or in the dental space at Envista, the digitization of a work stream relative to an implant or aligners like with Align. All of these things, they all need these kinds of tools that don't really add, they enable, but you could get just caught up in, it's a millions of dollars. How do I stay up to speed with all of the data requirement laws and all of these different countries and the regulatory stuff? So thank goodness there are these, and you see it like with Viva, which is now worth like $50 billion, which, is basically a solution built on Salesforce to enable the whole pharma industry to do all their distribution and marketing of their products and stuff for prescription drugs. So these kinds of solutions that integrate with others, we've used them, whether it's Workday with HR or it's Salesforce for sales or any ERP systems. These SaaS-like solutions are enabling us to do this digitization. So it's like when I started in this, you had to do everything, like manufacturing. Now you can outsource this manufacturing to this place, the cloud to this place. You can just specialize. You need to do value chain wise, which reduces the capital that's required and allows you to go faster as well with these medical devices.
Yeah, maybe Tom, if you don't mind, I'll just build on Scott's comment for saying, because you guys come from the industry and I have this perspective from Flex. Medical devices is actually the most vertically integrated industry out there, if not either one of the most or the most, right? So it's actually not in the DNA of people for medical devices to think, how do I focus on only what I need to do and outsource everything else, right? It's like the opposite of Nike, right? Nike, as we know, doesn't own anything, right? They're doing all the design work, but yet that's where all the value is, right? And so the medical device industry needs to make this journey, I would say, across the board, but certainly in digital, right? So for software, people who are software natives, they don't start by saying, let me build all my code from scratch. They're starting by saying, how do I build as least as possible and pick up all the other source code, right, from everybody else, stitch it together, and then add my value add, focus on my sort of value add piece, right? It's not how MedTech's historically been oriented. And they've unfortunately taken the same approach to the digital side. Many companies, obviously Scott's giving examples of many companies that are doing it the right way, but many companies have sort of are moving into digital, taking the let me start from scratch and build it all myself. And then and again, all the investment goes in the infrastructure and very, very little of the investment goes into actual value add innovation, right? The differentiating innovation. And so then the speed to market, as Scott said, the cost, lack of integration in the ecosystem, all those things then make these digital investments either not attractive or certainly, not as valuable for the patients and the companies.
We've established, and this is something we've talked about extensively last year, especially. Again, digital came to the forefront with COVID. We've all had to operate differently. We've talked with other companies. S3 Connected Health is a group that we've talked with. I don't know if they compete with you or not, or if they have a different solution, but there are a lot of companies forming that are offering medtech makers the ability to incorporate digital technology into it. So I guess, Scott, my question for you, you've been in on this earlier on. I want to understand what the landscape looks like now for incorporating digital technology into medtech, and what will hold us back? I mean, you can look at the patients. We've all got iPhones now. We're all somewhat connected. We're collecting data that can be useful. Physicians have had to bring digital into their world, or they've been able to through telemedicine and other means. We're talking now about medtech companies and developers of devices. Are all these constituencies, are they up and ready to go and they're all ready to push forward with this digital revolution, or are there some laggers? Where do we stand in that field?
Yeah, I think you've got people on the forefront who are pushing forward, who realize there's no going back. Everybody has to move to the MedTech 3.0 world with digitization. And so I think everybody realizes that, and COVID has just accelerated it, as you've said. Now, that's the what. So there's always the what, and then there's the how. So some people, are still struggling with the what and how they define it. And so some people may define it too broadly, and so it's hard for them to get started. I'm a proponent of get started with small steps and give yourself optionality to move into how the digital transformation in your service or product can evolve. And that's often using third parties and working and learning as you go. Or if you're like a J&J, I think they were very smart to partner with a Verily and Google to kind of get some digital native kind of blood and DNA into the organization about what's possible. But you get into a lot of elements of regulation that exist that are different in different places, that have, data privacy, data control, who owns the data, patients and HIPAA. Those all need to be dealt with. They're being dealt with, and we can't let it hold us back. We've got to lean into working, together, the physician groups, MDMA, AdvaMed, et cetera, around the world, Eucomed, to get after those solutions. And then there are these laggards who want to protect the status quo, because when industries go through transformation, there become new winners, and there are people who are losers. So there are certain people who are trying to have closed platforms, who are trying to slow down innovation to protect their position. They don't want to have to make investments in protecting an existing position because they have investments in new spaces they want to go into. And I would just say that's myopic, and it's going to end up with them losing their strategic position because that next generation is going to come along. So you see it across the board, but in general, there is a momentum that's extremely positive that's occurring at this point in time in this digital transformation. And you see it with the Cerners and Epics, which have over the last 2 years become more open, still not open enough, I would say, becoming more open. And we all just need to keep putting pressure on them.
And the payers as well. They need to be on board as well, right?
Yeah, and that's in that regulatory bucket with reimbursement. So, like Eric Topol's written a lot on this, great insights. If you're not going to pay for, a physician visit that's done telephonically, it's not going to happen, right? And so you need to look at what makes the most sense, what we can do, how it's scalable, how it makes sense economically for payers and providers. So, absolutely.
Well, I want to wrap this up, but Kal, you came into this, you've got experience on the pharma side. You're still working with pharma companies. Could you just give me a sense of where that industry is versus our industry? Do we have things we need to learn from them? Do we have things we can do better than they did? How do the two stack up?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's an interesting time, actually, because I think most pharma companies, they historically have been behind from a digital and from a regulated digital perspective, whereas medtech has been much more used to software and putting software right on defibrillators or neuromodulators or other connected solutions and so forth. Pharma historically has not had to work with software from a regulated perspective. Now, with that said, there's a total sea change happening in that industry. So across the board, virtually every pharma company now has a chief digital officer. Every pharma company is working on regulated digital health products, regulated apps, various types of algorithms. For example, at BrightInsight, we're working on personalized drug dosing algorithms, algorithms to help identify whether a person is appropriate for our therapy, algorithms looking for adverse events. That's often a combination of a wearable plus algorithm. So pharma in a big way is moving into this space, and I think the companies that are I think going to be the real winners through this part of the digital revolution are really those that are understanding kind of what we've been saying all along, which is how do we focus on really the data and the insights and the patient and the clinical side, not on all the infrastructure side. And pharma has the advantage of not having all this legacy spend that medtech has, right? I think unfortunately with medtech, many of the medtech companies, are saddled with existing infrastructure, existing teams that then create their own energy, right? Because they are like, hey, we want to keep spending on what we've built and grown. Mm-hmm. And so, and we've seen this story over and over, right? As Scott said, but you've seen it whether you want to use the Blockbuster example, Blockbuster video example, or you want to use the Kodak example, right? The incumbents, there's no shortage of strengths and capabilities and insights and talent. It's about the will to be able to take the leap to what the future is, right? And I think pharma in some ways will be easier for them because they don't have all the legacy stuff in place, if you will, to have to dismantle and kind of jump ahead to the 3.0 version. So maybe they can go from 1.0 to 3.0, whereas medtech's going to have to really disassemble some of the 2.0 sort of approaches to unlock 3.0.
Great. And Scott, I'll give you the final word. We've got just a few minutes. Where is medtech going from here, I guess, in terms of, is there a lot of deconstruction that needs to go on for this sector to go forward? Do you see that happening? And what do you advise a lot of companies? What are companies coming to you looking for advice? I imagine they need to have this in their PowerPoint presentation somewhere, a digital strategy. It's like the Asia strategy of 10 years ago. Everyone needs a digital strategy now, right?
You know me, Tom, I sign every email, go, go, go. And I would encourage companies to go, go, go. Quality speed relative to a digital strategy, but important to have one, to be thoughtful about it and be making progress towards it. And I think it's how can you improve what you're doing relative to the physician, the patient, with that solution. It's just, you don't just do it to do it, but I think there's opportunities to improve outcomes, improve access, lower costs, improve quality with digitization. So challenge yourself to think across those metrics, and then it doesn't require a lot of deconstruction. It's building on what you have, and now things are possible that weren't, because you can partner with people like BrightInsight to go digitize your workflow, your product, APIs that are straightforward to connect to other devices, cloud to connect to your customers in a whole different way, in data sharing or aggregating data for AI. There's just so many applications of digitization. Focus on the ones that you can accomplish, that give you optionality to move into later, that are competitive and important now. Don't try and do everything. Those are some of my off the top of my head thoughts.
Terrific. Excellent. Well, I appreciate the time, and certainly we'll be following up on the digital story a lot on Device Talk. So thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And we're back. All right. Well, we've had a digital surgery kind of day, Chris Newmarker, and now let's talk about some digital means of communications, i.e., social media. How can folks find you? I'll let you go first this week once again.
You can always reach me on LinkedIn, Chris Newmarker, just like a Newmarker handle, @Newmarker on Twitter. So yeah, Always happy to talk.
And I am on LinkedIn at Tom Salemi, Salemi. I am on Twitter at Medtech Tom. And please make sure you like and follow Mass Device, Device Talks, and all of our healthcare properties. Find us on all the major social media channels. And of course, please subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other major podcast platforms. That way you make sure you do not miss a future episode.
That's right. Be there or be square.